Alright, so this is going to be the video talking about setting up user accounts within Django. If you have not watched the other videos yet, please go ahead and do so. Those kind of help walk through setting up the Django and React Native app to where it is currently, and I'm going to be building off of that. So we're going to get started here. I'm going to open up the Django project, and we're going to open up under user API. We're going to open up views and URLs and models. And then we're also going to create a new file in here. Let's see where it is. Let's see. This is going to be serializers.py. And we're going to create a serializer for users that's going to help kind of manage the transfer of incoming data to modifying that data, authenticating users, creating tokens, and saving everything in the database. And so it just makes it a little bit simpler to manage things. We don't have any models in here yet. We probably won't add a model today, but eventually we will add a model for user profiles. However, we're going to be primarily using Django's built-in user model, and so we don't need to worry about creating the model specifically for it just at this moment. So we're going to create a class. Kick it off here, and this is just going to be users view, and actually we'll just use user view and API view. And in this view, we can have a few options. We can have our get requests, we can have our put requests, our post requests, delete. Kind of the idea is this user view will manage all aspects of signing a user in, modifying a user, creating a user, and deleting a user, and all of those things. So kind of what we want to do is we're going to start with just creating users. And so this is going to be a post request, self request format equals none. And just to verify this works, we're going to print out creating a user. And in our URLs, we're going to create a new path in here. It's going to be user slash, let's see, what does our main URL look like? Okay, so we already have user in there, so we can just ignore that part. So it's going to be create user and user view, and then be sure to import that as well. So there we are. We're going to save that. We're going to get Django running. So Python 3 manage.py run server, and then I'm going to open up Postman, and I don't care about an update right now. So we are going to create a new post request here, and it's going to be localhost 8000 API /v 1.0 user, and then create user. And it's just going to be a blank post request, but we should get a response. Actually, we won't get a response, so let's set up a response here. Return response, creating a user, and a status of 200. Save that really quick, and then we'll go ahead and send this, and we should see, okay, so we had an error, not found, API 1.0 v. Let's see. So we have our URL off a little bit. Let's look at some of our previous URLs. Localhost 8000 API v 1.0 app. Okay, so that should be. Where's our test? We got a test one in here somewhere. Oh. I believe it's missing a slash because this is a post request. Now if we send it, there we go, creating a user. So we got that working now. So the API does work. So we're going to take a pause. We have our view created. This is where all the logic's going to be for actually creating the user. But before we do that, we need to create the serializer for it. And so here we're going to create a class. I'm going to do the imports here in a second, but we're going to do a class user serializer, and we're going to use serializers dot model serializer. And so for this, Django's user model has a few items It's going to have email, password, username, first name, last name, and token. And the one thing to note is when I set this up, I typically set it up in a way that allows a user to log in with their username or email, and I typically save them both as the same. So Django defaults to requiring the username to be used to log in, and I prefer having the user being allowed to use their email, and sometimes I just set the username as their email. But we'll get into that more a little bit later. For now, we will set up the token. So token equals serializers dot serializer method field, and we're gonna have email equals serializers dot email field required equals true, and validators equals right now we just have the unique validator query set equals user.objects.all, and I think that looks right. I'm gonna kind of break these down a little bit, make it a little bit easier to read this and to understand what's going on here. Let's see, do that. Okay, so the unique validator basically gets a query set of all user objects and just ensures that the email is not already used within that. And then I believe we're going to do the exact same thing for the username. So username, and that's going to be a char field. And then required equals true. We're going to set a maximum length on the username at 32. And then the rest of that looks good. Oops. And then we're going to set the first name equals serializers.char field. And then this is going to be required with a max length of 32 as well. So we'll just kind of copy that. And then the last name is going to be the exact same. I'll get these over. Last name. Put that in there. And then we have the password. And password is going to be very similar. So password equals serializers.char field. Let's see, required. Oops. Required equals true. Minimum length of 8. So we want the passwords to be a minimum of 8 characters long. And the user can only write this. They cannot read the value of the password. So it is hidden and secure. Okay. So we have all of our fields. This is what we're going to be passing into this serializer. So we're going to create a few functions here. The first is going to be the create function. So self validated data. So we're going to pass in validated data. So we're going to have password equals validated data.pop password. Okay, so we're going to remove password from our array of data. The validated data is going to contain all of these fields pretty much. And we're going to pull the password off, and I'll explain why in a second. So instance equals self.meta.model, and then 2 stars, and then validated. So we're going to create a model with the data, and then if the password is, let's see, is not none, so if the password is not empty, then we will set the password. So instance.set password as password. And we're going to save that instance. And then we're going to return that instance as well. Okay, so that's our create function. That's how we create the user. And then we have a token as well. So def token, or get token. And self object. So we're going to do a little bit of work here. So JWT payload handler equals API settings dot JWT payload handler. So we're going to import some settings from our Django settings file, and then we're going to also import the encode handler. Encode handler equals API settings dot JWT encode handler. Oops, don't want to do that. Okay. And then so payload equals JWT payload handler. Oops, I don't want payload handler. And we are going to pass in the object, the user object. And then the token is going to be, we're going to encode it. There we go. Payload. And then we return token. So there's a lot there. Just copy and paste it. It's nothing critical. It's just creating tokens for users. And then class meta. So we're going to create the meta here. And model equals user. And then fields equals. So we're going to have token, username, password, first name, last name, email, and ID. And I'm going to throw these all on a new line. Make it a little bit more readable. Okay, so that is our user serializer. And now we're going to do the imports. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste these. You can type them in, or you can go to the GitHub link in the description below, and you can copy them in yourself. But we are going to have these 4 imports. We're going to save this. So we have our user serializer now. And so now in our views, we're going to do a few things. So we're going to import that user serializer. So from .serializers import user serializer. Okay. And then let's see. So in our request object here, so when we send in data, we're going to get it in the request.data. So our user data equals request.data, or let's see. Yeah, .data. And what we're going to do is user serializer equals user serializer. And we're going to pass in the data. Data equals, and then user data. And then we're going to check if it's valid. So if user serializer, serializer is valid, and we're going to tell it not to raise the exception. So we're going to catch the problem here. Oops. We are going to save it. So user serializer.save. And then we're going to respond if it's valid. Oops. We are going to respond with that data. So I'm going to do user and then user serializer dot data. And then if it's not valid, then it'll get down to here, which we will return a response error, or let's see, message, and then error. I'll just leave it at that. And status equals 400 for now. We'll save that, and we'll just see what happens. So we're gonna go ahead and submit just a blank post request. And oh, we got an error here. No module named user API dot serializers. Oh, I gotta rename it. Should be serializers.py. And let's reload Django. Okay, send. And we have a 500 error. Let's see. I believe it's simply because it was empty. Let's try adding some data here. Set some JSON data. And we will do username of Timvo. Let's see what that says. Okay, so still an error. So let's see. Oh, I wonder. Let's see, serializers. Okay, we're import user. API settings. Let's take a look here where this is happening. Okay, let's just check and verify our request.data. Just want to verify that it is outputting what I think it is. Username is Timvo. Yes, it is. Okay. It's probably a really dumb error that I'm just thinking right past. Okay. Let's see. Something weird's going on. Let's see, fields is none. Have field. Oh, maybe that should be fields. Ah, there we go. Fields equals. Missed an S. So now let's give this another shot. Send it. Okay, message error because it's incomplete. So now let's fill out all the fields. Email. Tim@poyadev.com, and oh, I forgot quotes around that guy. And let's see, first name is Tim. Second name, that's weird. Last name is Volner, and password, because we don't really care, is going to be new password. Alright, there's no validation here, so there's no way to, like, Django isn't set up currently to check that symbols and uppercase and all that crap exists, so we can just use test passwords for now. And when I send this, we should get a token back with a lot of other data, and there we are. So we have a token here. This corresponds to this user, and all the user information. I'm ID number 1 because I'm the first user to exist. So now creating users works. So now what we want to do is we're going to add a get in here. Format equals none. And what this get is going to be is this is going to be where we convert a user token into user data. So they pass in the token, and out comes the user's data, such as their first name, last name, all that sort of thing. So first we're going to check if they pass in this token, we want to verify that it's authenticated. So if request.user.is authenticated, and Django has this beautiful built-in model to figure it out. Let's see. It was false, or request.user.is active equals false. So if they're not active or they're not authenticated, they cannot access this data. And by authenticated, that just means that basically the token's invalid. Then it won't do anything. It'll just return. So it'll return a response, and this will be invalid credentials with a status of 403 unauthorized. Alright, so now our user is the user.objects.get username equals request.user.username. So because they pass in a token, Django automatically converts it into that user. And so we can just pull their user data just like this. And we're going to get the whole user right here. And actually, let me take a look here. I think we can actually just print out. Let's try something here. I can't recall if this works or not, but user equals user serializer, and that's going to be request.user. We're going to try to get the user data in a JSON format from the serializer by passing in the request.user. And we're just going to print user here just to see what happens and return a response testing status equals 200. Okay, so we're going to take this token. This is JWT token. It's important to remember that for this next step. So under headers, we're going to add an authorization. Oops. And it's going to be JWT space and then the token. And the URL is going to be this same URL. It's actually going to be get user. And then in URLs, we need to add that in here as well. So get user, get rid of the last slash, save that. And let's just see what happens here. Okay, so it did work okay. Let's take a look here. Okay. Oops, I meant to print the user.data. And yes, so that does work correctly. So now what we can do is we can simply return a response with that user's data. And so we are going to do, let's see, user.data. Save. And when we send this, we should get all the data right in here. There we go. So we've got our token, username, last name, first name, email, and so forth. So we have the ability to create the user, to get the user. Now we need to create the login view. I typically create this as a separate view from the creating and getting and modifying view, just because it's an authentication. But we're going to do class user login view, API view. And I'm actually going to move this get request to this user login view because of the fact that this is, this is more to do with login than it does creating and modifying a user. So I want to stay mindful of just keeping things in an orderly fashion. So we're going to change that there. User, we're going to also import user login view. Then we're going to create another one here, which is login user. So down here we're going to do a def post request again. Self request format equals none. Oops. And this is going to be our login class. Okay, and we're going to return a response of invalid credentials status equals 403. And the reason I'm doing this instead of 200 is because the goal is if the user is authenticated, it will return a response. If the end of this function is reached, then things aren't working out as well as they should have, and the user is not authenticated. Okay, so what we're going to do is so the user's passing in the username or email and password. And so what we are going to do is we're going to say user object equals user.objects.filter, and then we're going to search for both email and password. So the user is going to pass in a username under the JSON, but it can be either the username or the email, and so we're going to check for both. So email equals request.data username. And we're going to look for the first object in that set, or user.objects.filter username equals request.data username, and then same thing, dot first. So it's going to look for either of those, and if it finds it, then we'll have a user object, otherwise it'll be none. So if user object is not none, then we're going to set up the credentials and authenticate. So our credentials equals, we're going to create a dictionary, username, user object, the username, and password, user, this is going to be request.data, and then password. Okay. And then we are going to say user equals authenticate, and this is a method that we are importing, so we'll add an import statement here in a second, and we are going to bring in the credentials there. Okay, so now if user and user.is active, so if it's a valid login, if the user is active, then we are going to return a response with the data. So we're actually going to say if user and user is active, we're going to get the data from the serializer. So user serializer equals user serializer, and we're going to import the user, and then we're going to send that back. So user serializer.data status equals 200. Okay. So if the user is valid, if the login credentials worked, a user will come up, and we'll have the user object. And if that's valid and active, then we're going to serialize the user data so we can send it directly to that to the endpoint, or back to the application. So now we need to import authenticate. So we're going to come up here and do let's see, from Django.contrib.auth import authenticate. I think I spelled that right. Save that, and let's see, URLs. Let's see, login user needs to be a / at the end because it is a post request. So now we're going to create a new API call. Let's see, do we have it? Nope. And so we're going to create a new one over here, with post request, and this is going to be for logging in the user, and no authorization because we're not logged in yet, but we are going to send some JSON data with username, and I'm going to use my email address for this, so tim@poyadev.com, and the password we set earlier when we created the user was new password, and it does not like my single quotes, so we will fix it with double quotes. Okay, and we'll pass this in and see what happens here. Okay, so we have an error. User is not defined. Let's see. Okay, so we have not imported the user model yet from Django. So from Django.contrib.auth.models import user. We'll save that because we're using Django's built-in user model instead of our own. So we just importing that. All right, we're gonna send this back in, and it worked. I was able to log in. I got my token, all my information. Now let's just change this password even just slightly. Send it in, and invalid credentials. And try again and try again. Now, my username was Timville, so I should be able to replace my email with my username and be able to log in just fine. So there we go. So we have the user login working, and that's all within Django's API system. So the next task will be implementing this into the React Native app. So in the next video, we'll walk through tying the two pieces together. We have the login form in the React Native app. We have the login capabilities here. And so we will simply tie the two together and possibly move towards user registration as well.